Imagine a morning when the sky itself becomes the stage for a decisive confrontation, where every move could determine the outcome of an entire war. On this day, Stepan Bakhayev climbed into the cockpit of his MiG, a man whose name would later be whispered with respect, even by his enemies. He was a simple village boy, yet his path turned into a story filled with unexpected victories and secrets hidden from the public for decades. Behind him were battles where allies turned into rivals, and where a single shot could change the strategy of an entire army. His biography contains episodes that official reports kept silent about, and events that never appeared in newspapers. His fate is tied to that very day known in history as Black Tuesday, and to missions so secret they were never meant to be discussed. Why was he at the center of these dramatic events, and which facts still spark debates among historians? The answers await you if you stay with us until the end of this video. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. The village of Dvoretsky in 1922 lay across the vast Russian countryside, where life depended on the soil and the sky. On the 2nd of February, Stepan Bakhayev was born into a peasant family, their days ruled by harvests and weather. From an early age, he showed a different fascination. While other children chased birds for fun, he studied their flight with the focus of a scholar, trying to understand how they mastered the air. His path soon led to Lipetsk, a town alive with the Soviet Union's rising dreams of aviation. Stories about aircraft, whispers of new designs, and the chance encounters with visiting pilots filled the young man's imagination. Every tale seemed like a sign that his life belonged not on the ground, but in the skies. By the early 1940s, he finished trade school and began working at a metallurgical plant. The job promised stability, yet the nearby Aero Club pulled at him with irresistible force. Stepan chose both worlds, laboring by day and training by evening. This discipline revealed his character. He was not chasing fantasies. He was building a future through sacrifice and precision. For him, each flight hour was priceless. Unlike wealthier students who saw aviation as a pastime, he treated every lesson as an opportunity that could never be wasted. Gratitude mixed with determination became the foundation of his strength. When military service called, Bakhayev did not hesitate. The Krasnodar Higher Military Aviation School became his gateway to transformation. It was here that the village boy began to turn into one of the most formidable pilots of his generation, learning that true mastery of the sky required not only skill, but also the ability to make life or death decisions with absolute clarity. March 1943 marked the beginning of a journey that would test every lesson Stepan Bakhayev had learned about aviation, discipline, and survival. Graduating from the Krasnodar Higher Military Aviation School meant more than receiving wings. It meant accepting responsibility for outcomes that would ripple far beyond any single mission or engagement. Assignment to the 6th Reserve Aviation Regiment felt like preparation for something immense, though the exact nature remained shrouded in wartime secrecy. The atmosphere among new pilots crackled with nervous energy, some eager for combat, others quietly terrified, all aware that their training was about to meet the ultimate test of actual battle conditions. The transfer to the 515th Fighter Aviation Regiment in April brought Bakhayev closer to the front lines, but not yet into direct combat. This waiting period proved crucial for understanding the difference between peacetime flying and wartime survival. Every conversation with returning pilots added layers to his comprehension of what lay ahead. These weren't stories of glory. They were lessons in split-second decision-making, equipment failures, and the thin line between heroism and disaster. August brought deployment to the war front, and with it, the first taste of combat flying that would define the rest of his military career. The initial missions revealed the enormous gap between training scenarios and actual battle conditions. Enemy fighters moved differently than instructors had demonstrated. Anti-aircraft fire created chaos that no simulation could replicate. The weight of responsibility for wingmen and mission objectives pressed down with intensity that peacetime exercises had never approached. Bakhayev's approach to these early combat missions reflected his methodical nature. Where some pilots relied on instinct or aggressive impulses, he systematically analyzed each engagement, learning from both successes and near disasters. This analytical mindset served him well in an environment where pilots who failed to adapt quickly often failed to survive at all. The progression from nervous newcomer to competent combat pilot didn't happen overnight. Each sortie added experience, but also revealed new challenges and complexities. Weather conditions that seemed manageable in training became life-threatening obstacles during combat missions. Navigation skills that appeared adequate in peaceful skies proved insufficient when combined with enemy action and mechanical stress. Perhaps most importantly, these early missions taught Bakhayev that individual skill, while necessary, was never sufficient for survival or success. Understanding how to work within a formation, how to communicate effectively under stress, and how to balance personal survival with mission objectives became as crucial as marksmanship or aerobatic ability. The war was reshaping him from a skilled individual pilot into a combat aviator capable of functioning within the larger machine of military aviation. The romantic notion of aerial combat dissolved quickly when faced with the reality of watching comrades fail to return from missions. For Stepan Bakhayev, the transformation from eager pilot to seasoned warrior began with understanding that every decision carried weight far beyond personal consequences. The first time he witnessed a friend's aircraft spiraling toward Earth, trailing smoke and flame, something fundamental shifted in his perspective. This wasn't a training exercise where mistakes led to lectures and remedial instruction. Here, errors in judgment or technique resulted in consequences that couldn't be corrected or forgotten. The silence in the barracks after such losses spoke louder than any briefing about the stakes involved. Fear, Bakhayev discovered, wasn't something to be eliminated, but rather something to be managed and channeled. The pilots who claimed never to feel afraid were usually the ones who didn't survive long enough to develop genuine expertise. Understanding fear, acknowledging its presence while preventing it from dominating decision-making, became as essential as understanding aircraft systems or tactical formations. The physical toll of combat flying extended beyond the immediate dangers of enemy action. The constant stress of high-altitude flight, the G-forces from aggressive maneuvering, and the mental strain of maintaining absolute alertness during long missions accumulated in ways that peacetime training had never prepared him for. Sleep became elusive when dreams filled with replayed combat scenarios and near misses that could have ended differently. What emerged during this period was a hardened professionalism that balanced humanity with the requirements of effective combat performance. Bakhayev learned to compartmentalize grief over lost comrades while maintaining the emotional connections that made teamwork possible. This psychological balancing act separated the pilots who thrived under combat conditions from those who merely survived them. The evolution from idealistic young aviator to combat-tested veteran involved developing an almost supernatural awareness of aircraft performance, weather conditions, and enemy tactics. Every sense became attuned to subtle changes that might signal mechanical problems, approaching threats, or opportunities for successful engagement. This heightened awareness came at a cost. The peaceful simplicity of civilian life became increasingly difficult to imagine or remember. Perhaps most significantly, this period taught Bakhayev that heroism wasn't about individual acts of daring or spectacular victories. True heroism lay in the accumulation of competent, disciplined performances under conditions where competence and discipline represented the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The war was creating not just pilots, but professionals whose expertise would prove valuable long after the immediate conflict ended. The internal transformation paralleled his growing reputation among both fellow pilots and enemy forces. But reputation, as he was learning, brought its own burdens and expectations that would follow him through every subsequent mission and engagement. The progression from competent pilot to ace required more than accumulated flight hours or theoretical knowledge. For Stepan Bakhayev, the transition came through a series of engagements where tactical innovation, technical mastery, and split-second decision-making converged to create outcomes that transcended individual victory or defeat. Each significant aerial engagement revealed new layers of complexity in combat aviation. The German pilots he faced weren't inexperienced recruits, but seasoned professionals who had survived years of combat across multiple fronts. Defeating such opponents required more than superior equipment or numerical advantage. It demanded the ability to think several moves ahead while maintaining perfect control under extreme stress. Bakhayev's approach to these decisive battles reflected his methodical nature, combined with an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional tactics. While some pilots relied primarily on aggressive attacks or defensive maneuvering, he developed a style that seamlessly integrated both approaches depending on specific circumstances. This adaptability made him unpredictable to opponents who might have developed counters to more conventional tactics. The technical demands of combat flying during this period pushed both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits. Managing fuel consumption while maintaining combat readiness, coordinating with wingmen while tracking multiple enemy aircraft, and executing complex maneuvers while operating weapon systems required a level of multitasking that few individuals could sustain consistently. Weather conditions added another layer of complexity to these engagements. Fighting in clouds, rain, or extreme temperatures transformed every mission into a test of not just combat skills, but basic flying ability. Navigation became more challenging, communication more difficult, and the margin for error even smaller than usual circumstances already demanded. The psychological pressure of decisive battles extended beyond the immediate participants. Success or failure often determined the outcomes of larger strategic objectives, affecting ground forces, supply lines, and civilian populations far removed from the actual aerial combat. Understanding these broader implications while maintaining focus on immediate tactical requirements separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. What distinguished Bakhayev during these crucial engagements was his ability to maintain situational awareness that extended beyond his own aircraft and immediate opponents. He understood how his actions affected not just his own survival and mission success, but the performance and survival chances of every other pilot in his formation. This comprehensive awareness enabled tactical decisions that maximized overall effectiveness rather than individual accomplishment. The reputation built during these decisive battles would follow Bakhayev throughout his career, creating expectations and opportunities that extended far beyond World War II. But reputation, as he would discover, brought responsibilities that were sometimes more challenging than the original battles that created it. The 12 solo victories and 3 shared kills that comprised Stepan Bakhayev's World War II record tell only part of the story. Behind each statistic lay moments of extraordinary skill, courage, and tactical innovation that set him apart from his contemporaries and established his reputation among both allies and adversaries. One engagement that exemplified his approach occurred during a particularly challenging mission when weather conditions had separated his formation from their intended escort fighters. Facing superior numbers of enemy aircraft with limited ammunition and fuel reserves, most pilots might have chosen withdrawal or defensive positioning. Instead, Bakhayev executed a series of aggressive maneuvers that exploited specific weaknesses in German formation tactics, turning a potentially disastrous situation into a successful offensive action. His technique differed markedly from the more celebrated Soviet aces of the period. Where some relied on raw aggression or spectacular aerobatic displays, Bakhayev developed a style based on precise calculation and flawless execution. He studied enemy formations with the intensity of a chess master, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities that could be exploited through careful timing and positioning. The shared victories reveal another aspect of his combat philosophy. Rather than prioritizing individual achievement, he understood that coordinated attacks often produced better overall results for his unit while reducing risks to individual pilots. This collaborative approach earned him respect among fellow aviators who might otherwise have viewed him as competition for combat awards and recognition. Technical innovation played a crucial role in his success. Bakhayev experimented with unconventional tactical approaches that maximized the performance characteristics of Soviet aircraft while minimizing their known weaknesses relative to German fighters. These innovations weren't developed in isolation, but through careful observation of successful and unsuccessful engagements by other pilots in his unit. The 112 sorties he completed during the war represented not just individual missions, but accumulated experience that translated into institutional knowledge. Each flight added to his understanding of enemy tactics, equipment capabilities, and the environmental factors that influenced combat outcomes. This knowledge benefited not only his own performance, but also the training and success of less experienced pilots in his unit. Perhaps most significantly, his reputation for reliability under extreme conditions made him a pilot that others wanted to fly with rather than avoid. In an environment where trust between wingmen could determine survival, this reputation became as valuable as technical skill or tactical innovation. Fellow pilots knew that missions with Bakhayev were more likely to succeed and that he would make decisions that prioritized collective success over personal achievement. The foundation built during World War II would prove crucial during the next phase of his career, when former allies became adversaries and the stakes of aerial combat expanded far beyond national borders to encompass ideological and strategic conflicts that would define the post-war world. The path to becoming a legendary pilot wasn't paved with unbroken strings of victories and flawless performances. For Stepan Bakhayev, some of the most defining moments came during situations where survival seemed unlikely and success appeared impossible. Combat aviation during World War II involved risks that extended far beyond enemy action. Mechanical failures, weather emergencies, and navigation errors could transform routine missions into life-threatening ordeals that tested every aspect of pilot training and personal resilience. Bakhayev experienced his share of these challenges, each one adding layers to his expertise while revealing new vulnerabilities that required adaptation and growth. One particularly harrowing episode occurred during a mission when engine problems forced him far behind enemy lines with limited fuel and no radio communication. The temptation to panic or attempt desperate maneuvers could have proved fatal. Instead, he drew upon his methodical training to systematically evaluate options, conserve resources, and execute a series of careful decisions that eventually led to safe return to friendly territory. The physical demands of extended combat operations, took their toll in ways that weren't immediately apparent, but accumulated over time. The constant stress of high-G maneuvering, the effects of high-altitude flight on human physiology, and the mental strain of maintaining absolute alertness during long missions created challenges that peacetime aviation had never prepared pilots to handle. Bakhayev's approach to these challenges revealed characteristics that would define his entire career. Rather than viewing physical and technical obstacles as limitations to be accepted, he treated them as problems requiring systematic solutions. This problem-solving mindset enabled him to continue performing effectively, even when circumstances seemed overwhelmingly adverse. The psychological aspects of combat stress proved more complex than physical challenges. Watching comrades fail to return from missions, dealing with the knowledge that every flight might be his last, and maintaining emotional stability while making life-and-death decisions created pressures that affected different pilots in different ways. Some became increasingly reckless, others increasingly cautious, but Bakhayev developed a balanced approach that incorporated appropriate caution without sacrificing necessary aggressiveness. Recovery from close calls required more than physical healing or mechanical repairs. Each near disaster demanded careful analysis to extract lessons that might prevent similar situations in the future. This analytical approach to adversity transformed potentially traumatic experiences into valuable additions to his growing expertise. The resilience developed during these trials would prove essential during the next phase of his career, when the nature of aerial combat would change dramatically and the opponents he faced would possess capabilities and tactics unlike anything encountered during World War II. Perhaps most importantly, these experiences taught him that survival and success in combat aviation required not just individual skill, but also the ability to learn from adversity, adapt to changing conditions, and maintain effectiveness, even when circumstances seemed designed to prevent success. The conclusion of World War II marked not an ending, but a transformation for pilots like Stepan Bakhayev. While civilian populations celebrated peace and began rebuilding their lives, military aviators faced the challenge of adapting their hard-won expertise to a rapidly changing strategic environment where former enemies became allies and former allies became potential adversaries. Remaining in military service after the war required different skills than those that had ensured combat survival. The transition from wartime urgency to peacetime routine challenged pilots who had become accustomed to operating under extreme pressure and constant danger. For some, this adjustment proved more difficult than combat itself. Bakhayev's assignment to the 523rd Fighter Regiment in 1947 represented both continuity and change. The unit structure remained familiar, but the mission requirements shifted from immediate survival and tactical success to long-term strategic preparation for conflicts that might never materialize, or might prove even more dangerous than the war they had just survived. Learning to fly MiG jets introduced technical challenges that built upon his wartime experience while requiring entirely new skills and perspectives. The increased speed, altitude capabilities, and weapon systems of these aircraft opened tactical possibilities that hadn't existed during World War II, but they also created new vulnerabilities and operational requirements that demanded extensive retraining. The evolution from piston engine fighters to jet aircraft paralleled broader changes in military aviation and international relations. The skills that had made Bakhayev successful against German pilots during World War II required adaptation and refinement to remain relevant in an era of technological advancement and shifting geopolitical alignments. His reputation as a combat pilot opened opportunities for leadership and instruction that extended his influence beyond individual performance. Training younger pilots required different abilities than flying combat missions. but the experience gained during wartime provided credibility and practical knowledge that couldn't be acquired through peacetime exercises alone. The period between World War II and the Korean conflict represented a crucial transition in Bakhayev's career. The technical and tactical foundations established during combat against German forces would soon face testing against entirely different opponents using unfamiliar equipment and tactics in a strategic environment where the stakes extended far beyond national borders. This interlude also provided time for reflection on the lessons learned during World War II and their application to future challenges. The analytical mindset that had served him well during combat proved equally valuable during peacetime preparation, enabling systematic evaluation of new technologies, tactics, and strategic requirements. The preparation undertaken during this period would prove essential when international tensions escalated and former allies found themselves on opposite sides of conflicts that threatened to expand far beyond their original geographic and political boundaries. Away from the cockpit and combat zones, Stepan Bakhayev revealed characteristics that provided insight into the sources of his exceptional performance as a military pilot. The methodical precision that served him well during aerial combat extended into every aspect of his personal and professional relationships. Colleagues remember him as someone who approached every task with the same systematic attention to detail that characterized his flying. Whether discussing technical modifications to aircraft systems or planning routine training exercises, he demonstrated the analytical mindset that had enabled him to survive and thrive during some of the most dangerous aerial combat of World War II. His interactions with younger pilots revealed a teaching instinct that went beyond formal instruction. Rather than simply demonstrating techniques or reciting procedures, he helped developing aviators understand the reasoning behind tactical decisions and the importance of adaptability in unpredictable situations. This mentoring approach reflected his understanding that effective combat aviation required thinking pilots, not just skilled technicians. The transition from wartime intensity to peacetime routine challenged many combat veterans, but Bakhayev seemed to adapt more successfully than most. Rather than becoming restless or dissatisfied with reduced operational tempo, he used the additional time for systematic study of advancing aviation technology and evolving tactical doctrine. Personal relationships with fellow pilots were built on mutual respect rather than social compatibility. His reputation for reliability and sound judgment made him someone others sought out for advice on both professional and personal matters. This trust reflected not just his technical expertise, but also his ability to maintain objectivity and discretion in sensitive situations. The contrast between his humble origins and his achievements in military aviation never seemed to create arrogance or condescension toward those with different backgrounds. Instead, his peasant upbringing appeared to provide perspective that helped him relate to pilots from various social and economic circumstances, creating unit cohesion that enhanced overall performance. His approach to risk management extended beyond flying into daily life. Decisions were made carefully after consideration of potential consequences, but without the paralysis that sometimes affected individuals who had experienced too much combat stress. This balanced approach to uncertainty served him well in an environment where both recklessness and excessive caution could prove dangerous. The qualities that made him effective as a combat pilot, analytical thinking, systematic preparation, and calm decision-making under pressure, proved equally valuable in peacetime military service and would become even more crucial during the next phase of his career, when former allies became adversaries in conflicts that tested every lesson learned during World War II. The official records of Stepan Bakhayev's combat achievements tell a compelling story, but the relationship between documented victories and actual combat performance reveals complexities that challenge simple narratives about heroism and military effectiveness. Aerial victory confirmation during both World War II and the Korean conflict involved procedures designed to prevent false claims while accounting for the chaos and uncertainty inherent in high-speed combat. However, these procedures sometimes failed to capture the full scope of a pilot's contribution to mission success or unit effectiveness. The 13 confirmed shootdowns during World War II represent only those victories that could be verified through multiple sources and physical evidence. Combat conditions often prevented complete documentation of successful engagements, particularly when they occurred over enemy territory or during complex multi-aircraft battles where individual contributions became difficult to isolate and verify. Fellow pilots who flew with Bakhayev during both conflicts provide perspectives that sometimes differ from official records. Some describe engagements where his actions clearly disabled enemy aircraft that nonetheless limped back to their bases rather than crashing in observable locations. Others recall tactical decisions that prevented losses within his formation, contributions that don't appear in victory tallies but significantly affected mission outcomes. The disparity between official recognition and actual performance affected many combat pilots during both conflicts. Political considerations, documentation requirements, and the inherent challenges of confirming victories in three-dimensional combat environments meant that some exceptional performers received less recognition than their contributions deserved, while others achieved fame that exceeded their actual impact. Critical examination of Bakhayev's combat record reveals consistency that supports rather than challenges his reputation. The pattern of victories, the circumstances under which they occurred, and the testimonies of pilots who flew with him suggest systematic competence rather than occasional spectacular performance inflated by propaganda or wishful thinking. The evolution of his tactical approach over time provides additional evidence of genuine expertise rather than manufactured legend. Early victories show learning and adaptation, while later achievements demonstrate the refined techniques of an experienced professional who understood both his own capabilities and those of his opponents. Perhaps most significantly, the respect accorded him by enemy pilots and foreign military historians suggests that his reputation transcended national propaganda. American and Chinese sources from the Korean conflict acknowledge his effectiveness, providing external validation that carries more weight than friendly testimony might command. The intersection of individual achievement with larger historical narratives creates mythologies that sometimes obscure rather than illuminate actual performance. In Bakhayev's case, however, available evidence supports rather than contradicts the essential elements of his reputation as an exceptional combat pilot whose contributions extended beyond personal achievement to influence broader tactical and strategic outcomes. The legacy of pilots like Stepan Bakhayev extends far beyond their immediate combat achievements to influence contemporary understanding of military aviation, international conflict, and the human dimensions of technological warfare. Modern air forces study the tactical innovations developed during World War II and the Korean conflict not as historical curiosities, but as foundations for current doctrine and training programs. The analytical approach that characterized Bakhayev's combat style provides templates for pilot development programs that emphasize systematic thinking alongside technical proficiency. The transition from piston engine fighters to early jets that defined his career parallels contemporary challenges facing military aviators adapting to unmanned systems, advanced sensors, and network-centric warfare. His example of continuous learning and adaptation offers lessons for modern pilots navigating similar technological transitions. Documentary films and historical studies focusing on his career contribute to public understanding of the human costs and complexities of international conflict during the early Cold War period. These presentations help civilian audiences appreciate the individual stories behind strategic and political developments that shaped the post-war world. Educational institutions use his biography to illustrate themes ranging from social mobility and individual achievement to the role of technology in modern warfare. His progression from peasant origins to international recognition demonstrates possibilities for advancement based on merit and dedication, rather than social connections or inherited advantages. The Korean conflict, where much of his later fame was earned, represents a pivotal moment in international relations when limited regional conflicts threatened to escalate into global nuclear warfare. His participation in that conflict provides personal perspective on decisions and events that influenced diplomatic and strategic policies for decades afterward. Military historians analyzing the effectiveness of different national approaches to pilot training and tactical doctrine find in his career evidence supporting various theories about the relationship between individual skill, unit cohesion, and technological advantages. These analyses inform contemporary debates about military organization and resource allocation. International relations scholars studying the intersection of military performance and diplomatic outcomes during the Cold War period examine cases like his to understand how tactical success or failure influenced broader strategic relationships between major powers. The contrast between his modest personal demeanor and exceptional professional achievement offers insights into leadership and performance under pressure that extend beyond military applications to civilian management, emergency response, and other high-stress professions requiring individual excellence within team contexts. Perhaps most importantly, his story illustrates the human dimensions of historical events, often presented in terms of abstract political or strategic concepts. Understanding individual experiences helps contemporary audiences appreciate the personal costs and moral complexities of decisions made by political leaders during periods of international tension. The broader context of Stepan Bakhayev's career includes intersections with other remarkable figures from military aviation, whose stories illuminate different aspects of the same historical period and professional environment. During the Korean conflict, he served alongside pilots whose backgrounds and approaches differed significantly from his own, creating opportunities for mutual learning and tactical innovation that influenced the performance of entire units. These professional relationships demonstrate how individual excellence contributes to collective achievement in complex organizational environments. Technical developments in aircraft design and weapon systems during his career reflected broader changes in military technology and strategic doctrine. His adaptation to these changes provides insight into the challenges facing professional military personnel during periods of rapid technological advancement and shifting strategic requirements. The logistics and support systems that enabled combat operations during both World War II and the Korean conflict required enormous resources and sophisticated coordination. Understanding these support systems helps explain how individual pilot performance related to broader military effectiveness and strategic success. Training methodologies used to develop combat pilots during this period evolved in response to lessons learned from actual combat experience. Bakhayev's progression from student to instructor illustrates how knowledge gained under combat conditions was transmitted to subsequent generations of military aviators. Intelligence gathering and analysis capabilities during both conflicts influenced tactical decisions and strategic planning in ways that affected individual pilot missions and unit operations. The intersection between tactical execution and strategic intelligence provides context for understanding the broader significance of specific combat engagements. cultural and social factors within military aviation communities created professional environments that either enhanced or hindered individual performance and unit effectiveness. The relationships between pilots from different backgrounds, the development of unit traditions, and the management of combat stress affected outcomes in ways that purely technical analyses might overlook. Post-war career paths for combat pilots varied significantly, depending on individual choices, institutional needs, and changing strategic requirements. Bakhayev's transition from combat flying to instruction and leadership roles illustrates one pattern among many possible adaptations to peacetime military service. The medical understanding of combat stress and its long-term effects on military personnel was limited during much of his career, leading to approaches that sometimes helped and sometimes hindered pilot performance and personal well-being. His apparent ability to manage these challenges successfully provides insight into resilience and adaptation under extreme conditions. International recognition of military achievement during the Cold War period often reflected political considerations as much as actual performance, creating complexities in evaluating individual contributions to broader strategic outcomes. Understanding these political dimensions helps explain both the recognition he received and the recognition that might have been overlooked. The evolution of military aviation from a relatively small, specialized community to a major component of modern armed forces occurred during his lifetime, providing him with perspective on changes that transformed both the profession and its strategic significance. His career spans this transformation, offering insight into how individual careers adapted to institutional and technological change. Finally, the impact of his generation of combat pilots on subsequent developments in military aviation, international relations, and cultural understanding of warfare continues to influence contemporary discussions about military policy, strategic doctrine, and the human costs of international conflict. Their legacy extends far beyond their immediate achievements to shape ongoing debates about the role of military force in international relations and the responsibilities of democratic societies toward the individuals who serve in their armed forces. The story of Stepan Bakhayev ultimately illustrates how individual excellence, systematic preparation, and principled decision-making can create achievements that transcend personal recognition to influence broader historical developments. His progression from peasant origins to international recognition demonstrates possibilities that extend beyond military service to inspire achievement in any profession, requiring dedication, continuous learning, and the courage to perform effectively under extreme pressure. In an era when technology increasingly dominates military operations, his example reminds us that human judgment, adaptability, and moral character remain crucial factors in determining outcomes during periods of crisis and conflict. The lessons embedded in his career continue to offer guidance for contemporary challenges requiring similar combinations of technical expertise, strategic thinking, and personal integrity. Behind the documented victories and public recognition lay a shadow world of classified operations that would remain hidden for decades after Stepan Bakhayev's death. The nature of Cold War aviation required pilots of his caliber to undertake missions that officially never happened, flying aircraft that didn't exist, against enemies who were never encountered. The December 1950 incident over Primorsky Krai represented more than a routine interception. When Bakhayev shot down the American RB-29 reconnaissance bomber that had violated Soviet airspace, he was participating in a carefully orchestrated program designed to test Western intelligence capabilities while maintaining plausible deniability. The bomber's mission involved photographing Soviet military installations along the Pacific coast, gathering intelligence that would influence American strategic planning for potential conflict. These border incidents required pilots who could make split-second decisions with enormous political implications. A moment's hesitation might allow valuable intelligence to escape Soviet territory. Excessive aggression could trigger diplomatic crises or military escalation that neither side actually wanted. Bakhayev's demonstrated ability to balance tactical effectiveness with strategic restraint made him ideal for such sensitive assignments. Reconnaissance missions flown by Soviet pilots often involved aircraft modified with specialized cameras, electronic surveillance equipment, and extended fuel systems that pushed operational capabilities beyond normal parameters. These modifications required pilots to master flight characteristics that differed significantly from standard combat aircraft, adding layers of complexity to missions already complicated by political sensitivity. The escort of high-value personnel and critical cargo represented another category of classified operations. When Soviet officials or foreign dignitaries required air transport through potentially dangerous airspace, pilots like Bakhayev provided protection that combined combat readiness with diplomatic discretion. These missions demanded not only flying skill, but also understanding of protocol, security procedures, and the political implications of potential incidents. Testing experimental aircraft and weapon systems placed additional demands on elite pilots willing to risk their lives advancing Soviet technological capabilities. The transition from World War II fighters to early jet aircraft involved extensive testing programs where pilots evaluated performance characteristics, identified design flaws, and developed tactical applications for new technologies. Much of this work remained classified long after the aircraft entered regular service. The Korean conflict provided cover for numerous operations that extended beyond the official Soviet denial of direct participation. Soviet pilots flew missions designed to evaluate American aircraft performance, test new tactics against Western formations, and gather intelligence about United States Air Force capabilities and procedures. These operations required absolute secrecy to maintain the fiction of Soviet non-involvement while achieving strategic objectives. Communication intercepts and signal intelligence gathered during combat missions provided valuable information about enemy capabilities, intentions, and operational procedures. Pilots trained in recognition of significant radio traffic, aircraft modifications, and tactical innovations contributed to intelligence gathering that influenced Soviet strategic planning far beyond immediate combat results. The psychological warfare aspects of these classified operations extended beyond simple military effectiveness. Demonstrating Soviet technological capabilities through superior combat performance while maintaining official deniability sent complex messages to Western governments about the costs and risks of potential escalation. Individual pilot achievements became components of larger strategic communications. Documentation of these operations required careful balance between operational security and historical record-keeping. Mission reports used coded language, omitted sensitive details, and sometimes created entirely fictional scenarios to protect classified information while maintaining records necessary for tactical analysis and pilot evaluation. The personal toll of participating in operations that officially never happened created unique psychological pressures. Pilots couldn't discuss their most challenging and significant missions with family members, couldn't receive public recognition for exceptional performance, and sometimes couldn't even acknowledge to themselves the full significance of their contributions to national security. The human body was never designed to withstand the physical stresses that combat aviation imposed on pilots like Stepan Bakhayev. Understanding how the Soviet Air Force addressed these medical challenges reveals both the sophistication of their training programs and the extraordinary demands placed on elite aviators. High-G maneuvers during combat created forces that could render pilots unconscious within seconds if proper techniques weren't employed. The centrifugal forces generated during tight turns or rapid altitude changes pushed blood away from the brain, causing vision to narrow, thought processes to slow, and eventually complete loss of consciousness. Soviet medical research developed breathing techniques, physical conditioning programs, and equipment modifications designed to help pilots maintain effectiveness under these extreme conditions. The transition from piston-engine aircraft to early jets dramatically increased the physiological challenges facing combat pilots. Higher altitudes meant reduced atmospheric pressure, requiring pressurized cockpits or oxygen systems that added complexity to already demanding flight operations. The increased speeds of jet aircraft meant that G-forces built more rapidly and reached higher peaks during combat maneuvers. Altitude sickness affected pilots differently depending on their physical condition, previous exposure, and individual physiological characteristics. Symptoms ranged from mild headaches and nausea to severe disorientation and loss of motor control. Training programs included gradual exposure to high-altitude conditions, recognition of early warning signs, and procedures for emergency descent when symptoms became dangerous. The psychological stresses of combat flying created medical challenges that were poorly understood during much of Bakhayev's career. What would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder was often dismissed as cowardice or lack of moral fiber. Pilots who experienced recurring nightmares, inability to concentrate, or emotional numbness had few resources for treatment and often faced career-ending consequences if they admitted to psychological difficulties. Soviet medical research into pilot performance included studies of reaction time, visual acuity, and decision-making ability under various stress conditions. These studies informed training programs designed to maintain pilot effectiveness during extended combat operations, but they also revealed the cumulative effects of repeated exposure to life-threatening situations. Nutrition and sleep requirements for combat pilots differed significantly from normal military personnel. The caloric demands of high-stress flying, combined with irregular meal schedules and limited food availability during extended operations, required careful attention to maintaining energy levels and mental alertness. Sleep deprivation could prove as dangerous as enemy action, yet operational requirements often made adequate rest impossible. Medical treatment for combat injuries presented unique challenges when pilots were wounded while flying. Emergency procedures for dealing with bleeding, unconsciousness, or incapacitation while maintaining aircraft control required extensive training and specialized equipment. Some pilots learned to fly with significant injuries rather than risk crash landing in enemy territory. The long-term health effects of combat flying weren't well understood until decades after pilots like Bakhayev completed their careers. Chronic exposure to high G-forces caused spinal compression, joint problems, and cardiovascular stress that manifested years after active flying ended. The high-altitude environment contributed to vision problems, hearing loss, and respiratory issues that affected quality of life long after military service concluded. Recovery and rehabilitation programs for injured pilots evolved throughout Bakhayev's career as medical understanding advanced. Early treatment focused primarily on immediate survival and return to duty, but later approaches recognized the importance of long-term physical therapy, psychological support, and gradual return to full flying status. The April 1959 ejection that ended Bakhayev's flying career illustrates both the dangers inherent in military aviation and the medical advances that made survival possible. The spinal injuries he sustained would have been fatal or permanently disabling in earlier eras, but improved ejection seat design, emergency medical procedures, and rehabilitation techniques enabled him to survive and eventually function in civilian life. Medical screening and selection procedures for combat pilots became increasingly sophisticated as understanding of the physiological demands improved. Tests evaluated not only current physical condition, but also predicted performance under stress, likelihood of injury, and potential for long-term career effectiveness. These procedures helped identify pilots most likely to succeed while protecting individuals whose physical characteristics made them unsuitable for high-performance flying. The intersection of medical science and military aviation during Bakhayev's era laid foundations for modern aerospace medicine that continues to influence pilot selection, training, and support procedures. The lessons learned from pilots who pushed human physiological limits during combat operations inform contemporary understanding of human performance in extreme environments, from military aviation to space exploration.